Today's episode is brought to you by the Academy for Virtual Teaching. You know video is the most effective way to market your brand, but as the CEO of everything, you have no time to make it happen. It's overwhelming. At the Academy for Virtual Teaching, we get it. We want to help you to stop leaving money on the table. The Academy for Virtual Teaching is offering a free webinar. Make a promotional video in 3 easy steps. No stress, no fancy gear, just your phone. Learn how to create quick, engaging videos that work. Register now at academyforvirtualteaching.com or A4VT.com. That's A4VT.com. Thank you so much to the Academy for Virtual Teaching. And now here's the show. Welcome to episode 282 of the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals where you can strengthen your creative business, stay up to date on industry news, and build connections within our supportive trade association. Check it out at craftindustryalliance.org. Today on the show, we're talking about embroidery with my guest, Melissa Galbraith. Melissa is the fiber artist behind MCreativeJ. She was born and raised in the desert of Washington State, where her mother instilled a love of making things by hand at an early age. Melissa shares her love of nature through whimsical and modern hand embroidery kits, hands-on workshops, and her books, How to Embroider Texture and Pattern, and DIY Embroidered Shoes. Melissa Galbraith, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Abby.
Yeah, so happy to have you, and happy to have you as a longtime member too of Craft Industry Alliance. And I'd love to sort of talk a little bit about your childhood. I'm going to be honest, I didn't know that there was a desert in Washington State. So what does that even look like?
And I think a lot of people think of Washington State, they think of like a really lush green, which is more the western side of Washington. So there's like the eastern side, which is more farmland, dry, deserty, which is where I grew up, kind of like the bottom right-hand corner. And then after you go over the mountain pass, you get to the other side, and that's where it's very like lush, green trees, like much larger mountains. That's kind of like what everybody thinks of as Washington. And that's where I live now, but I grew up on the eastern side of the state. So we had like what they call mountains, we would consider hills on the western side, and it just gets super hot, like over 100 degrees during the summer. During the summer, and we would have like tumbleweeds roll by, like things like that. So it's much more deserty and dry and arid to the western side.
Wow, that's cool. So were you kind of interested in nature and hiking or being outdoors or just noticing, the flora and fauna that was around you as a kid? Because your embroidery designs now are very focused on nature. So I'm assuming now you are. I don't know if that has always been the case.
I think growing up, my mom and both my parents had us really like hands-on with everything. They had this big garden that we would get in and like weed and like pick berries and things like that. We did a lot of like hiking and camping. I was in Girl Scouts, so you really kind of get hands-on with things. And my mom had us trying all sorts of crafts, from I would say like quilting to bobbin lace to paper mache and embroidery. But I will say that like I'm not like a super big hiking outdoorsy person now. I walk my dogs like once or twice a day and like get around the neighborhood and see a lot of stuff. And I think just observing nature and seeing the beauty of that and taking in your everyday is kind of where I am now.
Okay. And so how did your mom know how to do all of these crafts? I mean, bobbin lace is kind of a specialty craft to teach your kids.
It is. I think so. My mom, her grandma taught her how to sew because her mom wasn't really into like crafting. But my mom like really wanted to learn. And I think for her, it was her creative outlet because she's a chemical engineer by trade. And so it's very like math and science. And I think crafting was much more of that like creative thing she could do on her own. And in my parents' house, she has this like giant craft room. It was probably like one of the biggest rooms in the house. And it was filled with like fabric and sewing machines and all sorts of stuff that she could like dive into and have fun with. And I think she just really wanted to learn and teach herself, and she surrounded herself with friends that were interested in similar things. So they would like dive into different projects together and like really get into it for a little while and then kind of like move on to another project and things like that. But always like my mom always had a project going. I remember as a kid, like she had these giant bins of scrap fabrics, and my sisters and I would kind of like get in there and like pull out pieces and make costumes with them. So we have this funny picture of me wearing like, I think it's like purple and blue, like fleece that has like leopard spots on it. And I was pretending to be a cave woman. So just like fun things like that.
That's awesome. Yeah, it's super creative. I love it. Okay, so when you went to college, you studied like graphic design, and so I'm guessing that there was some artistic strain besides sort of just tagging along with your mom's crafts. But you don't go to college to study graphic design if you don't have some feeling like, well, I'm good at art, or I enjoy design, or color, or shapes, or something.
Yeah, I mean, when I went to school, I wasn't entirely like college, I wasn't entirely sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I liked art and I knew I liked playing with colors and textures. So I kind of dabbled in graphic design, took some classes around like how the web worked and why people do what they do on the web. And then I also got a minor in fine arts so I could really like play around with all the other art classes. So I took like block printing and pottery and drawing and things like that. But I wasn't entirely sure where I wanted that to lead when I graduated college. So I actually, my first job outside of school was with a newspaper, and I used to do print advertising. And I kind of quickly learned that I really did not enjoy that. Like, I think around that time, like Mad Men had glamorized advertising and made it seem like super cool. And I was like, oh, that would be so amazing to do. And working in ads for a newspaper is not fun. Like, car dealers are so mean and like just getting everything right and then having it go to print and stuff. It's kind of stressful and just figuring out. And I was like, I realized that isn't kind of like the art I really loved and enjoyed. So from there, I kind of transitioned into more like communications and social media and still kind of doing some graphic design. But it was like more newsletters, websites, social stuff. And then I was like, I sit behind a computer all the time and don't really love this. So I got back into more of the tactile crafting experience. And now that's what I do full time and love.
Right. Yeah, totally. So, well, first of all, I'm like very old. So I'm amazed that you graduated from college in 2011, that there were classes on how the internet worked, like in college. Like I
Yes.
graduated from college in 1997 and we had an email address, and that was new. That was like very exciting. So that was about it. But it kind of tells you like how fast things moved in that, those few years from one to the next. So anyway, what kind of classes could you take at that time in college that were like about the internet or about what people do to make money on the internet?
It was kind of more about like how people use the internet and what they do on it and like metadata and like building websites in the background and kind of like how people build communities and what they like do with those and stuff. So it was new. It was like a new
Hmm.
program at WSU and just something like interesting. But I think where they had it was not quite the right fit for the program. I think it was in like the communications department. It really should have been more in like the business to help people really get a better understanding of how that works with like, making money and like small business and things like that instead
Yeah,
of more in like how people talk
communications.
to each other. So
Yeah, yeah. And were you entrepreneurial at all, like growing up or in those college years? Because you're very entrepreneurial now. And, like I associate you as somebody who's like really working hard to make this business grow. And like whenever I see you doing things, you're out there like, working on it. You're not like sitting back waiting to be chosen. You're like, how can I, pursue the next thing? And I've seen your business grow over these years. So that is a very entrepreneurial spirit that I recognize. And I wonder if you've seen that in yourself, prior to this time.
oh gosh. I mean, well, thank you for saying that. I feel like I guess growing up, like I had like a lemonade stand as a kid, and like sold Girl Scout cookies for the Girl Scouts and things like that. But I wouldn't really say I was like super entrepreneurial in like college or like right after college. But what I have learned, like owning my own small business and like now doing this full time, it's like you have to be willing to put yourself out there and like put yourself forward so that you have things come up because things are not going to be given to you. Like it's very rare that you are going to be like recognized and have somebody be like, oh, I want to do this with you. This is a thing I like recognize about your business and think it's super cool. You have to tell people, shout it from the rooftop, show them and like be like, I want to help with this. I want to do that. Like, let me be part of this. So that way you then like have more stuff that's going on. If you sit back, like no one's really going to come to you, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the confidence of being able to do that, like you have to also be confident. And really what you have to be confident in yourself, but you also have to be confident in your product. I feel like when you feel like, oh, my product, it's good. Like I know this is really beautiful. The instructions are really well tested. The packaging is really done right. You know, you're going to get this and really like it. Then you feel like, oh, sure, I'm happy to put this out, you know, because I know people are going to really like it. Whereas if you feel like, well, it's not really up to snuff, I'm not super
Yeah.
proud of it. There's parts of it that I wish were different. I didn't really check these directions or whatever it is. Then you kind of feel like I don't really want to like shove this out there because people might find out that it's not really top quality.
Exactly. And I think, you know, when I first started my business, I was very insecure about kind of like figuring out like how to get out there and do that. I didn't really know where to start. I had never envisioned myself starting a small business, let alone doing this full time. I didn't start out by making embroidery kits and now, but it's what I do. And I kind of like developed and pivoted and figured out what worked well for me and what worked well for my customers and kind of like what fit well within the kit itself based on like price point and materials and things like that. And, you know, it's a growing process, a learning process. And that feedback you get kind of helps you along the way. Yes, sometimes it can really like sting and not be like great, but at the same time, it helps you grow to make a better product and feel more confident in your product as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so you were working, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were at the Bezos Foundation for a number of years before jumping out onto your own.
Yes. Yeah.
So, were there things that you learned in kind of the communications department, I guess, at the Bezos Foundation that were helpful to you when you did decide to leave, or things that you still use now, thinking back, like, oh, I learned that there. You know, that helped me to develop these specific skills that I can use in my own business.
I think when I was there, it was really kind of like in tandem, I guess, like helpful with what I do now because a lot of the skills I had, I would do like blogging, website updates, write newsletters, reach out to different people to make like connections and get interviews and things like that. And a lot of that
Yeah.
stuff that I was doing there, I was also doing for my small business and stuff that I would learn about like social media or websites or like newsletter stuff for my small business. I could also apply there as well too. So they really kind of like
Mm.
helped each other in both ways. Which was really nice. I think working at the Bezos Family Foundation, we had always shortened it to BFF. Working there, we did some different like campaigns, working with different target audiences because they have different programs. One's more about like early education, one's about art education, and then there's another like scholars program they have. And so kind of those different programs, getting to work on those, create different campaigns, figure out how to target different audiences and figure out like the supports they need and how we can put that out on social was kind of like a really interesting process. And like, you know, learning about campaigns and sharing your product.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people don't have that experience at all when they start a small business. So they have to learn all of that from scratch. So I think that is really helpful. And it sounds like while you were there, you were sort of getting restless, wanting to get back to making things with your hands and maybe had found embroidery again after learning in childhood. So talk about that sort of time period. I guess you were sort of working there, but also doing embroidery at home.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of got back into embroidery when I moved over to the western side of Washington. And I had originally moved over to work for like a couple school districts in communications. And then from there, kind of like bounced over to a small stint at T-Mobile doing social media and quickly realized that was also not for me, and then moved back into more of the education sphere with nonprofits for BFF. And throughout that time, I was just really like on the computer all the time. And I missed that, like tactile experience of crafting and making. But I lived in a really small apartment. I had 600 square feet between me and my now husband. And there wasn't a whole lot of space for crafting and making. So I dabbled around, tried some other things, and kind of fell back in love with embroidery. As a kid, I really loved coloring. And for me, embroidery is like the adult version of coloring. So you get to fill in different spaces and create textures. And I just really loved it. And as I mentioned, I didn't see myself starting a business, but I got so into embroidery that I was kind of like, I either need to give these pieces away, do something with them, or like sell them or find another hobby. And I was like, I really love this. I don't want to find something else. So I was like, okay, well, let's just start a small business and see what happens. And I ended up doing started out with like farmers markets, kind of did some other markets throughout the year. And at the time I was selling finished embroideries, not kits. But I kind of pivoted and figured out that like I didn't love selling my art that way, and people actually really wanted to learn how to make things. So I pivoted to like making kits and teaching workshops, and that slowly started taking over my life. So it was like me working two full-time jobs, essentially, like one for a nonprofit and one for myself. And there was no time for like anything else in between. And it kind of got to this like breaking point where I was like, if I want to grow my small business, I have to have more time to do that. And this is where my passion is. So I ended up quitting my day job. But I would say that like when I did that, I hadn't like intended to do it around that time. I definitely thought there was going to be like a couple more years of like transition and process. But I actually signed up to do the H&H America's trade show as my first like out of state big trade show. And there was like just some like a lot of other things that came up around the time with like my day job and needing to like travel for that and like fitting everything in. And I was like, if I'm going to do this, I need to just figure out how to do this. And my husband was like, just quit your job, figure it out, we'll make it happen. And thankfully we had like a little bit of financial security because he has a really great day job as well too. So I was able to make that work, but it was super stressful and scary to kind of like transition from this full-time employment to like being your own boss.
Oh my gosh, it's so scary. And I'm thinking like when you first made that transition and like woke up in the morning and didn't have to go to the other job. Like one of the things I think people often ask is like, what does your typical day look like? You know what I mean? Like, how did you sort of decide like, okay, well, what do I do first? Like, how does, because when you're your own
Yeah.
boss, nobody's there being like, this
Mhm.
project needs to be completed by Thursday. So you're going to need to have that on my desk. Like you
Oh,
have to
yeah.
figure that out. Yeah.
Yes, it was actually terrifying. I would say probably like for the first couple months when I started my day job, I actually had like started my working for myself full time. I actually had to talk to a therapist because I was trying to figure out like I felt like I was stuck. I was like, how do I figure out what I need to do to run my small business? Like
Right.
before, when I was like a small, like a side business, I was like, I know what I'm doing. I can like, like work on this project and then this is coming up. So like work towards that market and things like that. And when I became my own boss, I was like so terrified because I was like, now I need to like make money, bring this in, figure out how to pay for like health insurance and like run payroll and like, figure out what the year looks like and how like the plan out your projects. And I think had I had more of a plan when I like quit my day job to do that, then like it would have worked out better. But because it was a little more like, okay, you just like need the time to do this, we're gonna stop this one thing and start your small business now full time. For me, it was like that stress of not knowing where to like take that next step. So thankfully being able to like talk to a therapist, figure out like, okay, set small goals, work towards those, then figure out what like the larger goal is, and you can like work backwards. That really helped. And now that I've been doing this for about like 3 years, I've kind of figured out, maybe it's four, I don't know, the the ebb and flow of kind of like what a year looks like, planning for different events. Because I do like trade shows versus craft shows versus like hands-on workshops and things like that. And also figuring out like what times of year are slower, what times super busy, when I need to like bring in help, when I can focus on like working on certain projects like designing kits, writing a book, like figuring out other things, how to kind of slot all of those in to like work throughout the year.
I'd like to take a minute now to talk with our sponsor, Lyric Montgomery Kennard from the Academy for Virtual Teaching.
I'm Lyric Montgomery Kennard, and I'm coming to you from the Academy for Virtual Teaching.
And Lyric, I hear you are creating something for people to learn how to promote themselves with video. Tell us more about that.
Right. So you know that video is the authentic way to market. It's the way to make a real connection with your viewers, especially in this age of AI, right? We want something real. And the Academy is offering a free webinar for people who are the CEO of everything in their business with no time, no extra anything on their calendar to make video, right? But it doesn't have to be scary. We offer a very easy 3-step process for making a promotional video, doing what you're already doing with tools you already have.
I love that because promotional videos are useful for literally every kind of business imaginable.
They absolutely are. Whether you're a shop, a designer, an educator, everybody knows that video is what gets your viewers' attention. If you're not using video in your marketing, you are leaving money on the table.
Right. So this is a great way to get introduced to how to do it with the tools you already own and not a lot of extra effort or cost. So I love that. Tell us how we can sign up for this free webinar and learn how to do this.
Absolutely. You can find it at the number 4 VT. We'll put the link to it on our homepage of the Academy. The full URL is academyforvirtualteaching.com, but you can use the shortcut URL.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Lyric. This sounds terrific. Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot and a lot of new things to learn. I mean, you weren't running payroll before.
No.
You weren't, you weren't doing the all, so it's just a lot of tasks, and they can feel very difficult to understand. And it's like way out of your wheelhouse and like just not your strength. And, like I have had that same feeling of like, I can't do this. I don't know how to do this, and it's just like
Yes.
this terrible sinking feeling of like, I am not going to be able to do this because I can't figure out all of these elements. And then structure, also just the structure of your day, the structure of your month, the structure of your year. Are you bringing in enough income? Is it too many projects? Like it's, how to not have your whole day be taken up by responding to email and having your inbox be your to-do list. Like there's just, a lot of issues there where it's like, well, what are the things only you can do? Where it's like design work and the creative work, which has to come from you, whereas other people can take care of some of the other things. But then you have to train them. I mean, there's so much to do.
Oh, gosh.
So yeah.
Yes. And also just letting go of that control, because when you
Yeah.
are like the owner, like you're the one that feels like you needs to be hands-on with all the things, and finding like somebody who's like reliable and can help you with some of that, but then also like ceding them that like control to be like, okay, you are now in charge of this portion of that project. I know you can handle it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what you discover is that they're better at it than you are. If you hire the right people, you have
Yes.
people who are really, really good at the things that you're really bad at. And so it's great in the end, but it's scary also. So
It
yeah.
is. And it's kind of nice because like some people you'll find that like I had one friend who used to help me for a while until she moved. But she like loved doing the mundane tasks like folding boxes, folding papers and things like that. And so I would just give her like stacks of boxes and like tissue paper to fold and like prep for kits and things like that, which made it so much easier because then I wasn't spending all that time doing that. And then when I went to go put together kits, I had all that ready to go. So I could just grab and like start putting things together instead of having to do all the prep work beforehand.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right. So it sounds like you had started selling finished embroideries. People would come up to the booth, give you feedback that maybe you didn't always love, and then ask if how they could make it themselves. So you kind of pivoted to kits. What were some of the first kits like? Because building a kit is a learning experience. Kits can be a lot of different ways. And the process of figuring out, especially if you're going to have them, and I know you do in a wholesale setting where they're going to go to retailers and be on shelves, there's a lot to figure out and learn from there. So what were the first ones like, and what have you learned about kit making in particular? I mean, that's a whole book in and of itself.
Yeah, gosh. My first kits were very sad. I will fully admit that. So anybody who bought a first kit, thank you, and I am sorry. The first kits, they were like in those like cellophane, like 8.5 by 11 clear bags. They had printed instructions. It was a lot of text, not a lot of photos, and kind of like it had materials, but they weren't like super cohesive, I would say. And I kind of learned that, like, people love photos. They are helpful. I also love photos. So it's like important to have those in your kits. From there, I kind of transitioned to more of like a rigid cardboard envelope, and then kind of realized that those are a little hard to like stack and display and hang. So then after that, I switched to cardboard boxes that are white and then have like a wrap that goes around them. But I kind of kept the materials pretty much the same. I did get them a little more cohesive, source better hoops, kind of like find suppliers that were allowed me to order larger quantities. I still put in full skeins of thread. I do like a really nice John James needle, and now I have Nurge hoops that I put in my kits. They're really thick beechwood hoops that I love. But kind of just like the process of building a kit and figuring out your supplies and stuff like that is a process in itself. Figuring out like what supplies you like. Are they like, can you order them in bulk? Can you get them at like a good price? And then also, like, is that price point worth it to then like put it in a kit, let alone sell it for wholesale and things like that? And I've kind of figured out now, like, how many colors are good to put in a kit to keep it at like the average price point that people really like buying a kit from me at. Also, like how much stuff will actually fit in a box. So I've done a couple different box sizes. I have found that like the ones that I have that are about like 6x6 with like a 1-inch depth works really well. I've tried bigger boxes, and I think people get intimidated by the size a little bit of having a bigger box because they're like, oh, it's so big, like that's too much. But having a smaller box feels more compact and portable and still has everything, which is good. But then that can also kind of make it so you can't have like super big hoop sizes and things like that. So I can usually fit like anywhere from a 3 to a 5-inch hoop for circles, and then I think I use a 4x6 oval in my other kits as well too. And I've tried other hoop sizes and things like that, and I think most people really appreciate the smaller hoops because the project feels approachable. And now I have like step-by-step photos in there because I have a really big stitch library that I've built up and been able to pull from. So building out kit instructions makes it a lot easier. I have started filming more like stitch videos as well too, because some people have recommended that those would be good. So putting like links in kits as well to where people can find those. So slowly adjusting and adding things over time, figuring out kind of like what works well for me, what works well for my customers, what I can actually fit inside a box and then sell, retail, wholesale, things like that.
Mm-hmm. And your designs are very nature based. I feel like, that's sort of what you've honed in on as your style, or what you're known for, I guess. Would you agree with that? And you also are very good at like texture, and building textures.
Yeah, I mean, I go with nature because I think it's kind of hard to mess up. Like plants always grow in fun, different ways. Like maybe a bug took a little nibble out of a leaf there, and it's okay if it doesn't look exactly like the finished photo. There's a lot of like leeway with it, versus doing like houses or people or things like that. You have like a little stitch wrong, and you're like, oh, that doesn't look right, So there's a little more wiggle room in there, which I think makes it feel more approachable. And nature is kind of one of those things that like I could design a mountain that's like Mount Rainier that I see a couple blocks away from me, but it could look similar to a mountain you see. So there's like, could be same mountain, but like crossover, because like it's very relatable. And I feel like it's easy to like, for me to pull inspiration. Like when I take my dogs out on a walk, I see a lot of like trees and mushrooms and wood stumps and ferns and plants and things like that, as well as going like I like to travel. So being able to pull inspiration from like places I visit, whether it's like plants or landscapes or different things, just kind of what I relate to, which is why I think when you're designing, it's important to pull from what you know and what you like feel as relatable and approachable to yourself. When I was kind of figuring out what my, I guess, design style was, I had tried other things like pop culture and lettering and stuff like that, and it just never really felt like me. So, figuring out what my niche was and like trying out other stuff before I got there is kind of how I landed on plants and nature and landscapes and things. But I will say, like, I think the reason I like to use a lot of texture and color and like pattern and things with my stitching is because I think of it as coloring. So figuring out how to like build up different textures and like put in different colors in different ways. I love playing with different fabrics for backgrounds because I think it adds a lot of like motion and depth and dimension to a piece. And I think that's part of like growing up as a kid. My mom let us like play with a bunch of fabrics and bunch of different materials. So it felt natural to kind of like grab other stuff and mix and match and play around. Before I started doing kits, I had done like a series of punch needle and embroidered landscapes. So it was kind of like punch needle on the bottom and then more of like a fabric collage on the top with like plants embroidered in there. And they were super fun. I really enjoyed doing that. So kind of just like mixing and matching different materials as well too to create textures. I guess when I like think of a piece and want to like put it together, I think a little bit in textures too, because different stitches and doing them in different directions and dimensions will give you different looks. And when you kind of look at nature, you see like, oh, this leaf makes this shape, or I want to like get this texture in there. How do I do that? And what stitch would give me that type of texture? And how can I combine them to create something that looks more realistic? Is kind of how I think when I design a project.
And you do a lot of teaching. And I think, it sounded like you started doing teaching pretty early on in the process of building this business, like not too late. So what is the interplay between teaching and the information that you're gathering while teaching and designing?
I think they really tie in nicely together because teaching helps you figure out like pain points for students and like what can be like a hurdle or where like they might need extra help. And then you can provide that in your kit and other things when you offer tips. It's also just really exciting to see like people who haven't stitched before or are like haven't tried something like maybe they stitch, but they haven't done like this specific project before. Just see them get really excited about it and like learn new tips and tricks along the way. When I start out class, I always start at like the very beginning and I help people like put their fabric in the hoop and figure out how to get it like drum tight. And then we split apart our thread. And seen some people realize that you can split apart thread, let alone pull out one strand at a time so it doesn't tangle up. They're just like, oh my gosh, this is mind blowing to me. And then also I like to teach the quilter's knot because I think it's just it's funky to learn, but it's like easier once you get it going because it's a really great knot. And people like watching people create that, they're like, this is magic. What is this knot? Like, they're like, I'm going to use this as a party trick. It's just that great. So just kind of seeing people get really excited, knowing like what works really well and being able to demonstrate and show those kinds of things in class. And then, similarly, I do that in a kit, but in printed instructions and things like that. So there's a lot of tie-in that way.
And you haven't been afraid to spend money. It's a risk always to go to a trade show, for example. You talked about that big step of going to H&H Americas for the first time. And I think you were in the India Untangled Newcomers Pavilion that first time that you went. But that's expensive. You live in Washington, that's in Chicago. You have to drive or fly and then, get the booth and stay in a hotel and eat out and all the rest. So, for a small business owner, there's definitely people who say, "Oh, I can't afford to do that, and it's not for me." I'm not ready yet. So, talk a little bit about your sort of thinking of like, I am ready and I am going to do this, and whether it was worth it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think trade shows, yes, they are expensive, and there are ways to cut back on, pricing and things like that and figuring out what works for you. I think had I not been willing to like put myself out there, I wouldn't have made a lot of connections that have served me well in the future. So wholesale and trade shows are more of a long game instead of like a immediate payoff. So yes, you
Yeah.
are going to like put more money in up front, but you will see it returned throughout like the months and years that follow, which I think is really important. I think it's also to when I went to my first trade show, I will say I'd never done a trade show before. I didn't really know like what kind of setup to expect, what kind of buyers would be there. And honestly, I think it can be a little overwhelming because when you're like, oh, I need this really big fancy booth, like, and you see these really amazing ones at trade shows that are just like elaborate and gorgeous. But I have found that honestly, like doing something very similar to what I do for craft shows works well because the buyer that's coming to my booth is usually like a smaller business anyway, and that's how they're displaying and setting stuff up. So being able to see that and see like, oh, I don't need anything crazy elaborate. I can easily like take this off the shelf and put it in my store makes it more approachable.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, interesting. And you sell on Fair, and we did an article about Fair not too long ago, and kind of the back and forth between Fair and trade shows, which I'll link to in the show notes, so people can take a look at that. But you've really built out your wholesale. You've got a lot of retailers who are working with you now, and I guess a lot of people will say, I can't afford to do wholesale because wholesale, it's a bulk situation, right? There, you make it up in volume, as they say, but then you have to actually really be able to make it up in volume. So, has wholesale been helpful to you? Has it been worth it to you? There's returns, there's all kinds of things that happen with wholesale. So,
yeah, I mean, I think wholesale has been really great for me. It's probably about like at least a third of my business right now, when I balance like retail and workshops and things like that. But I mean, I think, before you even dive into wholesale, you need to figure out your pricing and figure out like what works for you. Can I like, price my kit accordingly versus like when you sell wholesale, you're essentially cutting it to like about half of retail. And so you need to figure out like, what is the retail price? What is the wholesale price? What am I buying my materials at? And things like that. So I always do that math when I'm like figuring out what a new kit is. And that's kind of how I figure out like how many, skeins of thread work well to fit into a hoop and things like that. But I mean, it's kind of, like you said, I do in-person trade shows and then I have Fair. And it's kind of a interesting balance because some buyers absolutely love Fair and like love to shop on there. But then I'll be at a trade show and I'll have like a buyer come up and be like, oh, I've seen you on Fair. Now that I see your stuff in person, I do want to buy it, but it's like takes that extra step of me having to like do a show for them to actually see it to then want to carry it in their store versus like you can see the same exact thing on Fair, the same photos,
right.
So it's kind of, I think wholesale is a lot about really building connections, and like a lot of outreach. Like I hired a VA to kind of help me find people, send out emails, get that whole email sequence in place and stuff like that. And just continually being like, hey, I'm here. Do you want embroidery kits? They're cool. They would be great for the store, and like, because I've had some buyers that have been on my email list for like 3 years and then finally decided to make a purchase. But it can take a while sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. That's really reassuring. And we talked about 2 books that you've written, and I know you have a 3rd book on the way. And was writing a book a goal of yours, like from the start, or, how did that come in?
So it kind of grew out of teaching. When I first started teaching workshops, I would have a lot of people ask for additional resources outside of class and be like, how can I continue learning beyond taking another class? And they didn't really want like a kit, but they wanted other things. And I'd be like, well, I have a blog that has a bunch of like great stuff on it. But they wanted something that had a little more cachet, and like a book is that kind of next resource step to be like, somebody believed in me enough to publish this information. So it's
right.
like better than a blog in people's minds. And so I was kind of like I think it was, gosh, like 2021, 2022, maybe. I just made it my goal for the year to be like, I'm going to find a publisher and publish my book. And I think it was around that time there was like a lot of embroidery books coming out, and a lot of people on Instagram were being like, a publisher reached out to me and now I'm writing a book. And at that time I was like, I'm not one of those lucky people that's going to have somebody reach out to me in order to like get something published. I need to put in the work and like do it. So I probably spent like at least 6 months pitching publishers to be like, this is my idea. This is why I think it's super cool. And I found this really helpful like ebook that was written by a publisher or an editor that was like, this is kind of what you need to include, and this is why it's helpful. But I will say, like, pitching every publisher is different. Like, everybody wants different stuff from you to figure out if it's like a good fit or not. And I had a few conversations with different publishers, and then eventually Fox Chapel Publishing was like, yeah, let's do this. This sounds great. And it was a really great process. I mean, I will say that my book idea changed a little bit from when I first pitched it to when it actually was like published and off to print. We broadened the landscapes that were in my first book, How to Embroider Texture and Pattern, so it wasn't so niche. And I think that was really helpful for like more people to want to try it and create, like, play with pattern and create texture and try out different stitches and things like that. And after I wrote my first book, I just really enjoyed the process, and it felt like this really cathartic way to make time and create a collection of like pieces that I wasn't necessarily making the time for otherwise. And after I really got into, like, I did like a bunch of landscapes for my first book, I had also like really gotten into like clothing embroidery and embellishing like pretty much most of my wardrobe at that point. And I was like, okay, that's what I want my next book to be about. So I had then pitched that to my editor. We kind of went back and forth. I sent her some different photo examples of projects that I was like, these would be really great to put in a book. And we ended up niching that one down actually to just shoes instead of more of the broader clothing embroidery topic, which I think can be challenging because, you know, there's so many different types of clothes and materials and things like that, that shoes are a little more standard, I guess, for what you're going to like get with what you embroider. And I think it's a little more it's niche enough that people are like, oh, I do really want to try that, but not so niche that it's like obscure in a way, which makes it really great. And I think kind of just like figuring out what your editor is looking for in a book is helpful, and how it can really stand out from a crowd. Because I will say there are tons of embroidery books out there, and really figuring out like how your book would be different and why you should be the author behind that is really an important like process in getting your book published, because you want people to like look for it and be like, oh, I'm really excited about this book because, you know, like, people know I like to play with different like stitches and textures and create that rich depth. So they'll know to expect that, you know, in a book, and things like that. And
yeah, I think that feedback, when you pitch a book to an editor and they're interested and they come back and say, yes, but what if we did it this way? So this is a way to get like a second perspective on your work, right? You're both looking at the same thing, which is this body of work that you have in mind to create and sort of based on what you've already made. But what they're seeing is, how can we sell this? What is this going to look like on a bookshelf? What is this going to look like to a broad base of consumers who've never seen you or never done embroidery? And so they're seeing your work in a new way and giving you that feedback. And sometimes it can be unwanted. You're like, no, that's not what I had in mind. But I found through the process of writing my own books that it's actually very helpful to get that feedback, because they understand how to almost like package your work in a way that maybe you hadn't seen before.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think, you know, they're trying to figure out the best way to sell you as well to a broader audience. And I think books have really helped me reach more people and share my work. And maybe they might not buy a kit, but they want a book, or maybe they're just looking for like stick and stitch patterns that they can use on different things. So there's lots of different like points of entry to figuring out
Mhm.
MCreativeJ.
Yeah, and I'm really glad that you talked a little bit about the process, that 6-month process of pitching, because I think sometimes looking from the outside in, it can seem as though, oh, this was like a shoe-in, an overnight success. Like, obviously this is how this happened. And sometimes, yeah, you're right, it does happen that way. But more often than not, and in all honesty, sometimes like it's better if you're the one out there pitching versus being chosen, because sometimes when you're chosen, you're very flattered and can accept a deal that's really not the best deal for you. It may not be the best publishing partner. I always tell people if one is interested, others will be interested. So make sure you go out there and make sure you're really getting the right partner and the right deal for you. So sometimes you being the one to pitch is better because you're able to sort of see what comes in and get as many things. So the way that I did this was go to Barnes and Noble and pull the books off the shelf that I thought were cool and write down the names of the publishers because I had no idea who the publishers even were. And I was like, okay, there's one called Abrams, there's one called CNT. Like, who are these people? And then go on their websites and figure that out. I don't know if you did a similar process, but like, how did you even know who to pitch?
I did something very similar, but mine was more like looking on Amazon and seeing different craft books that were out there. And then I had just like an Excel spreadsheet of like, this is the book, this is the publisher, and then like going on their website and like linking to their like submission information and things like that. And then I would kind of like have this giant spreadsheet. And then from there, I would try to send like 1 or 2 emails a week to the different publishers. So I would work on like packaging up my content and kind of like putting a little check being like, okay, this was sent on this date, so I knew I had like pitched to them. And then if I hadn't heard back in like a month or two, I would follow up, and things like that, because it's a lot of like a waiting game. Like you put all this work in and send it out. And sometimes they get back to you and they're like, hey, we'll look at it. Sometimes they're like, we may never get back to you. You just don't know. And sometimes they do. And they're like, oh yeah, we want to talk to you about this. But it's like a lot of different steps in the process. And you just have to kind of wait and see and continue putting yourself out there.
Yeah, I think that's great. And now when I go on Amazon as well, I always look at who the public. I see a new craft book like on Instagram, right? I'm like, "Ooh, cool, new craft book. This, I'm interested in this, or this looks pretty." I'll go to Amazon, find it, add it to my wish list. But the first thing I do is look to see who is the publisher. Like once you're sort of in the know, you're like, "Oh, who's the publisher for all these books?" And you sort of build your understanding of who's doing what. And once like anything in the world, once you get into it, you sort of become obsessed and understand like who all the players are and what they're doing. So, yeah, absolutely. So, okay, cool. And it sounds like this third book, I don't know if you want to talk about it yet or how much you've said about it, but it's funny because I think it's really about, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's got like stump work in it, correct? This new one. Okay. So stump work is like a 3-dimensional embroidery. You can describe this much better than I can because I'm not like that good at embroidery. But one of the things that we were talking about recently on a craft business roundtable through Craft Industry Alliance was about the proliferation of AI generated embroidery patterns. And one of our members was saying a lot of them, and they're these sort of luscious, sort of, I don't know, surreal embroidery patterns that aren't actually patterns, but are generated by an AI, generation tool. But a lot of them are like 3-dimensional. Like they have like a 3-dimensional stump work element. And she was saying she's actually now creating more stump work patterns because of the clear popularity of these sort of AI generated ones. It seems like that's what people want. So why not give them the real thing? So I thought that was a very interesting phenomenon to see happen. So I think you're on the right moment for stump work is all of that is to say.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I feel similar. I think there's a lot of like AI generated patterns out there now, and they create these really beautiful, like raised techniques. And I think in combination with AI becoming more prevalent in the embroidery space, a lot of people really got more into embroidery. I would say during the pandemic, it was one of the great things to come out of the pandemic is people wanting to get back into crafts and making things. And now those people that have stuck with it, they're like, okay, I've done the basics. I want to try something more advanced, something more elaborate, something different. And I think stump work is kind of one of those next steps that you're like, how do I do that? How do I create that 3D dimension and things like that? And really like using different stitches in different ways to create those different elements is really fun. And that's really what I wanted to explore with my third book, which is all about like 3D botanicals. So it has poisonous plants, medicinal plants, and carnivorous plants. And there's kind of a combination of different things that you can wear, and a few like display pieces and things like that. But they really play with like 3D and sculpture, and like using stitches in different ways. So like chaining your woven picot and then using that to make like flower petals that are stuck together, creating much like fluffier cast on stitches for really puffy marigold flowers. And then I also kind of used stump work to create some like freestanding 3D elements as well too in different ways. I did some like pitcher plants that stand up out of like a one of those like glass dome standing kind of terrarium style things. So it was just really like a fun exploration of getting to try different stitches, playing with different materials, and seeing how far I could push them to create different plants and things like that. Bring them to life.
That's so cool. Yeah, I've seen a couple of photos, like teaser photos out there, and this is really like embroidery to the next level. This is embroidery that's sculpture and something like I've never done, and seems really cool. So definitely something that could make you sort of known for being the one who's doing this. I haven't seen a lot of books about this either. So I think it's super cool. And you stuck with Fox Chapel throughout. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. They've been just a really great partner and really wonderful to work with. And my editor has been just really supportive. So I have appreciated working with them. And it's just kind of nice to know that like, if I have an idea, they would be interested in hearing it. And maybe it might not be exactly what goes to print, but we can like bounce ideas back and forth and figure out what works well.
Right. Okay. Any before we get to your recommendations, which we're going to get to in a moment, any long-term goals or things that you would love to sort of reach for down the road? You've been in business for several years now and are really doing this full time. So, you've achieved a lot. I mean, you've done a lot of the things that I think a lot of people would reach for. So I don't know if there's other things that you're thinking about or sort of just going to keep on keeping on.
I mean, so I think one of the trends this year was to create a bingo card for the different stuff you wanted to create instead of a vision board. And so I have a bingo card with different things on it. And some of them are definitely like super far reach goals, and some of them are like feel a little more approachable. So like one of the things on there that I have been trying to do for the past few years is really figure out that like work-life balance and like take time for myself versus like always working all the time, which I think is very easy to do when you run your small business. So I am starting out with that, doing better this year. And I think one of the other goals I had on there, which, like, I think as you run a small business, figuring out what platforms work well for you and where you want to invest your time. My goal this year is to also monetize my YouTube channel, just because I think being able to show more video tutorials and have that support that way, and then, actually getting revenue from it would be helpful for me, just to not put things out there to have them out there. So that's kind of two of my big goals for the year.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that work-life balance one is really important, because what can happen is you're like, okay, work's done at 5, then you have dinner, and then, your phone beeps and it's like someone needs customer service and it's 7:30. And like the temptation is to be like, well, I want to be good and like answer their question. It's not a hard question to answer. So I'll just go on there and just be like, hey, well, we'll find the tutorial right here, like whatever. And it's like, yeah, but then,
then it just snowballs and
it snowballs,
like doing 9 other things.
Exactly. Yeah. And so like I have the goal, although this does sound ridiculous, but one of my goals is that I don't open the laptop on Saturdays. Like the laptop is closed. And so it cannot be opened. It's like locked, I can open it on Sundays, but not on Saturdays. Like that one day of the week, it is closed. And that is tough, so because I still have a phone. It's not like I don't have a phone.
Yes, absolutely.
It's just like the laptop, So anyway, it's hard. Setting those limits is super hard, but I think that's a great goal. So, okay, you wanted to recommend hot yoga. I love hot yoga. I was going to hot yoga this fall and it was fabulous. I live in a very cold climate, so hot yoga is great.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely part of like my work-life balance and figuring out like what I can do for myself. And I've started taking like a 9:30 in the morning, like whether it's hot yoga, bar, yoga sculpt, whatever they offer at the studio that's super close to my house has been really great. And then it kind of like makes sure I have time for myself. I can move my body and then I can focus in on whatever else I need to do.
Oh my gosh. And it's great for your mental health too. I go to Orange Theory every day and like, it's just like there's nothing on the calendar from 8:45 to 9:45 because I'm at the gym. And then I'm like chill for the rest of the day because whatever happens, I'm like, I've got this like chill mindset. It's so helpful. So I think that's great. And I'm no athlete, let me just say. But you don't have to be a good athlete to move your body. That's what I've learned. So, okay,
True.
craft nights with creative friends.
Yes. I mean, I think as a small business owner, we always get like so deep in things for ourselves and like, forget that there are other people out there that we can like do stuff with and find as a support network. And I think having it be low stakes is really helpful as well too. So I usually do like once a quarter or so have like my friends who love to craft, whether they run a small business or not, get together and we just like work on whatever fun project we have that maybe we haven't had a chance to get to for a while and just talk about whatever. And it's so freeing and helpful to just have that space and time with them.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you had to find a new hobby since your hobby became your business?
Um, yes and no. I mean, I do definitely work on projects for myself, but I think it's also, trying to find that balance of like, okay, this project is for like this thing I'm working on is for this project, and there is like an end goal for it. So like I can only work on it during business hours versus like this project, which for me is for more fun and personal, can work on that outside of business hours and kind of just setting those guidelines as well too.
Yeah, it's hard. And then the Artful Fox Mighty Frame. I don't know what this is.
Yeah, so it is. I was introduced to slate frames earlier this year, the end of last year, and it's kind of a variation on a slate frame where you don't have to lace it up on the sides as much. You can just like slot in your fabric, roll it up, and then it has these screws that help you get the fabric super taut by stretching the bars. And as somebody who had never used a slate frame before, like having to dress a slate frame felt very intimidating and just takes a really long time as well too. So their new frame that they have makes it feel much more approachable. And honestly, you can dress the frame and I would say like under 5-10 minutes and it gets your fabric so taut, and you can use like much bigger pieces of fabric, which is really nice for larger projects. You're not having to like move your hoop around and then have all these weird hoop creases and things like that. So I've just found it really great and wonderful to work with.
Very cool. I'm going to look into this. That's super neat. Well, Melissa, this has been great. Thank you so much for being on the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. It was awesome talking to you.
Well, thank you, Abby. This has been so much fun.
And you've been listening to the Craft Industry Alliance podcast. I'm Abby Glassenberg. Today's episode was brought to you by the Academy for Virtual Teaching. Imagine making videos that create authentic connections with your customers and actually convert into sales. It's absolutely possible. The Academy for Virtual Teaching's free promotional video webinar will show you how to make quick, engaging videos using only your phone in 3 easy steps. It's our gift to the creative businesses who bring so much joy and beauty to the world. We invite you to register now at academyforvirtualteaching.com or a4vt.com. That's the number 4, vt.com. See you there. Craft Industry Alliance is a community for craft professionals. When you become a member of Craft Industry Alliance, you get in-depth coverage of craft industry news, the opportunity to connect with fellow professionals for advice and support, and access to an educational library filled with ideas, tools, and resources to help you as you build your business. Join us at craftindustrｙalliance.org. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.